our culture is so incredibly woke and so tremendously stupid that you can't even fully escape it in death. Long after you've died, your body decomposed into the ground, the woke brigade might still come along and cancel you. Now granted, when you're dead, you probably won't care very much. Things will either be going so well for you at that point or so poorly that it's not going to bother you much either way to find out that you've caused an extremely belated controversy on Twitter. But those of us who are still alive will have to deal with it. So even if you aren't troubled, it's annoying as hell for the rest of us. And that brings us to Judy Garland, who is the latest dead person to find themselves on the cancellation chopping block. Garland died over 50 years ago, but that didn't stop her from provoking mass outrage on multiple social media platforms over the weekend when the woke brigade found out that Judy Garland in the 1930s, almost 100 years ago, did blackface. Now, one of the posts calling attention to this fact came from some random Twitter account that published an image of the actress in blackface along with this caption, quote, "2 movies, a year apart, same. Shout out to Gen Z for teaching me this." Now that post was viewed 57 million times. TikTokers also got in on the action. Here's another random account that managed to get a lot of traction with a post calling attention to the blackface issue. Watch.
Talk about Judy Garland as a child in blackface.
Coming for to carry me home. Oh, I come from the south, from way down south, where the corn and potatoes used to grow. There's great big elegant pictures show, and my old Kentucky home is a French chateau. Way down south in Dixie, sweet, oh, sweet.
Hey, I think we got something there. I'm sure we have.
Carry me home.
All right. That's real music, at least. Now, from there, the media jumped into action. Outlets like Newsweek and the Daily Dot published articles on the subject. The Wrap had this headline: Judy Garland criticized for wearing blackface in 1938. White people found this an acceptable form of entertainment. Yes, those dastardly white people. It's important that we spend all of our time looking for all the bad things white people did in history. We must leave no stone unturned. Did anyone of any other race enjoy forms of entertainment in 1938 that we today would find offensive? Well, who cares? That's not important. All that matters is what white people were doing wrong. And here's another thing that they were doing wrong. Of course, if you really want to be upset about white people in blackface, you don't have to go back that far. I mean, there's always Justin Trudeau or Jimmy Kimmel. But Trudeau is a leftist and Kimmel voted for Biden, so they get off the hook. Now, Garland probably also voted for Biden since she's dead, but that did not absolve her, apparently. Now, we should note that some people did come to Judy Garland's defense. They swept in to add nuance and contextualize the Judy Garland blackface scandal. And although these nuance adders are less crazy and slightly less obnoxious than the woke mob, they still missed the point by several thousand miles. Watch this.
Judy Garland was trending yesterday on the app formerly known as Twitter. Let's discuss. This user expressed their outrage at finding out that Judy Garland had made films with blackface. If you don't know me, hi, my name is Tori. I'm a Wizard of Oz historian and collector, and as such, I know a lot about Judy Garland, her filmography, and her career. Before we begin, I want to start by giving a trigger warning because I will be showing images and some clips from films that have blackface scenes. But I hope even if you are made uncomfortable by this type of content, you will try to muddle through because it's important to talk about. I'd also like to add the caveat that I'm coming at this from the perspective of a white person, and therefore my voice in this conversation is not as important as black voices.
Well, if you were hoping for a rational, common sense perspective, you've already heard 3 things here that should temper those expectations. Specifically, there's her caveat that her voice doesn't matter because she's white. Also, she unironically offers trigger warnings, and perhaps most concerning of all, she identifies herself as a Wizard of Oz historian, which sounds a bit like claiming that you're an anthropologist who specializes in studying the ancient kingdom of Wakanda. Now, we're not starting on the right foot here, to put it mildly, but let's keep listening anyway. Here it is.
I'm not going to sit here and make apologies for blackface or to try to justify it. It's gross. It's gross. But here's the truth about Judy Garland's participation in this. She had no agency over what roles she did. Here's Judy Garland signing her MGM contract at the age of 13, in which she also agreed to give her mother, Ethel Gum, a portion of her weekly paycheck, making her the main breadwinner for her entire family. Louis B. Mayer was not shy about making sure that his stars stuck to their contracts. Judy Garland was assigned scripts to do, and then she did them. 2 movies, a year apart, because it's much easier to just blame Judy Garland rather than the patriarchal system that made her decisions for her.
And there it is. Let's not cancel Judy Garland from the year 1938. Let's instead cancel the patriarchy from the year 1938. This is what we get from Garland's defenders. Though she does make one correct point, which has been echoed by nearly everyone else defending Judy Garland from this posthumous cancellation attempt, it's true that she was a kid when she performed in blackface. She didn't have full agency over her decisions. All of that is true. But it's also not really the reason why it's so stupid to get offended by a blackface performance from the 1930s. The real reason is simply that performing in blackface in the 1930s was not some great sin back then. It doesn't matter how old she was at the time. What matters is the time, the 1930s. That's the only relevant detail here. That's all that needs to be said. In a world filled with uncertainties, one shot blackface was not a big deal in the 1930s. Now, we might consider it a big deal today, unless you're the Canadian Prime Minister, but the people living in the 1930s were living in the 1930s, not in the modern age. Okay, they just didn't see it that way. You can say, well, they should have seen it that way. Yeah, but they didn't. Okay, so they just didn't. That's all. Judging them by modern standards, it's not just unfair and wrong, though it is both of those things. It's also incoherent. It doesn't make sense. You might as well say that Johnny Unitas wasn't a good quarterback because he never scored any home runs. You're judging by a completely different set of standards. It doesn't mean anything. See, I will never stop marveling at the fact that we live in a society filled with moral relativists who are relativistic about everything except the one thing they should be, in a certain sense, relativistic about. Most of the time, these people can be heard saying things like, hey, I'm just living my truth, man. Hey, don't impose your morality on me. Normally, they would say that truth and morality are fundamentally and substantively relative, that they change entirely from person to person. And yet, when it comes to assessing the actions of our ancestors, of people who lived decades and centuries ago, these very same people suddenly become merciless and stringent moralists, imposing one unwavering set of morals on people who don't agree with it. Now, the irony, of course, is that this one time when they drop the relativistic gig is the one time when it would actually apply, again, in a certain sense. And let me explain what that sense is. Moral truth does not change over time. What is objectively immoral today was objectively immoral 90 years ago and 900 years ago. So moral truth is not relative. However, moral culpability is relative. Okay? You don't need to factor in the century and decade when a sin occurred in order to decide if it was a sin. But you do need to factor those things in if you're trying to assign moral responsibility for those sins. And if you're trying to assess the degree of moral responsibility. A wrong action does not become more or less wrong over time, but an individual can be more or less responsible for that wrong action over time. Which means that the amount of personal responsibility that we should assign to individuals for racial insensitivity in the 1930s or any time period before that is basically nothing. Okay, there's essentially no responsibility. Racial sensitivity, as we recognize it today, did not exist in the world anywhere among any group of people a century ago. How much blame should we give to any one individual for not having personally achieved a racial enlightenment that nobody else in the world had achieved either? How much guilt should we assess to people who failed to have developed the kind of racial sensitivities that nobody else on the globe during that era had developed either? The answer to those questions is basically none. And this is the fact you have to deal with. People in history saw the world differently. They saw each other differently. They therefore acted very differently. And that's just the way it was. You can be mad about it. You can be upset. You can make your tummy hurt. But your anger is futile and stupid. And mostly it is a cover. It is an excuse. I'll back up. It's not, you're stupid, but you're also a coward. Okay, it's cowardice as well. Because you want to spend your time blaming other people for their lack of moral insight while not thinking at all about your own inadequacies in that regard. Judy Garland didn't see a problem with blackface because really nobody at that time saw a problem with it. And you can waste time canceling Judy Garland for that, or you can ask yourself, what evils do you support and promote today just because everyone else supports and promotes it? Where are your moral blind spots? Maybe stop and think about that before you go searching for another dead person to lecture for their shortcomings. And that is why those who are trying to cancel Judy Garland are themselves today certainly canceled. Hey, YouTube.
I don't know, like watching that video, it made me think about kind of a lot of things, and I wonder, how you guys feel about that. Like, watching that video makes me so upset, to be honest. Like, it's very difficult, and I mean, I don't want to have to like think about politics like all the time and think about like how I'm forming my ideologies on certain things, but when I hear shit like that, it's just like, he can't be fucking serious. But he's serious, and that's a little bit exhausting. It's a little bit exhausting.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? What's really interesting about what's happening in America right now is that a lot of people don't seem to realize how dominoes connect, how one piece knocks another piece that knocks another piece, and in the end creates a giant wave. Each story seems completely unrelated, and yet at the same time, I feel like everything that happens in the world connects to something else in some way, shape, or form. And I think this news cycle that we witnessed in the last week was a perfect example of that. Amy Cooper, George Floyd, and the people of Minneapolis. Amy Cooper was, for many people, I think, the catalyst. And by the way, I should mention that all of this is like against the backdrop of coronavirus. People stuck in their houses for one of the longest periods we can remember. People losing more jobs than anyone can ever remember. People struggling to make do more than they can ever remember. And I think all of that compounded by the fact that there seems to be no genuine plan from leadership. Like, no one knows what's going to happen. No one knows how long they're supposed to be good, how long they're supposed to stay inside, how long they're supposed to flatten the curve. No one knows any of these things. And so what happens is you have a group of people who are stuck inside, all of us as society, we're stuck inside, and we then start to consume. We see what's happening in the world. And I think Amy Cooper was one of the first moments that one of the first dominoes that we saw get knocked down post-corona for many people. And that was a world where you quickly realize that while everyone is facing the battle against coronavirus, Black people in America are still facing the battle against racism and coronavirus. And the reason I say it's a domino is because think about how many Black Americans just have read and seen the news of how Black people are disproportionately affected by coronavirus. And not because of something inherently inside Black people, but rather because of the lives Black people have lived in America for so long. Coronavirus exposed all of it. And now here you had this woman who, we've all seen the video now, blatantly knew how to use the power of her whiteness to threaten the life of another man and his blackness. What we saw with her was a really, really powerful, explicit example of an understanding of racism in a structural way. When she looked at that man, when she looked at Cooper and she said to him, I'm going to call 911 and I'm going to tell them there's an African American man threatening my life. She knew how powerful that was. And that in itself is telling. It tells you how she perceives the police. It tells you how she perceives her perception or her relationship with the police as a white woman. It shows you how she perceives a Black man's relationship with the police and the police's relationship with him. It was powerful. Because so many people act like they don't know what Black Americans are talking about when they say it, and yet Amy Cooper had a distinct understanding. She was like, oh, I know I know that you're afraid of interacting with the police because there is a presumption of your guilt because of your blackness. I know that as a white woman, I can weaponize this tool against you, and I know that by the time we've sifted through who was right or wrong, there's a good chance that you will have lost in some way, shape, or form. And so for me, that was the first domino. And so now you're living in a world where so many people are watching this video, so many people are being triggered, because in many ways it was like a gotcha. You know, it was like the curtain had been pulled back. Aha! So you do this, because it's always been spoken about, but this was like, it was powerful to see it being used. And I think a lot of people were triggered by that. A lot of people were like, damn, we knew it was real, but this is like real, you know? I think a lot of people also angry that some of the outrage that came to her was because of her dog. And I mean, I get it, you know, but it was, a lot of people felt like it would have been great if the dog shelters had the same, I guess, power, or if police departments were run by the people who run dog shelters, because they seem to act like this. They didn't waste time. They were like, nope, we'd like our dog back, lady. Which I'm going to be honest, I think that was a hell of a punishment. Her job is one thing, taking a white lady's dog. That was a nice dog. And so that was the first domino, you know? It was the first domino where I felt like you could feel something stirring. And all of this, again, is in the backdrop. It's coronavirus has happened. The numbers have come out. You know, the story of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, that story has come out. All of these things are happening. And then the video of George Floyd comes out, and I don't know what made that video more painful for people to watch. The fact that that man was having his life taken in front of our eyes, the fact that we're watching someone being murdered by someone whose job is to protect and serve, or the fact that he seemed so calm doing it, you know? Oftentimes we always told that police feared for their life. It was like a threat, and you know what, you always feel like an asshole when you're like, you didn't fear for your life. Why did you fear for your life? How did you fear? But now more and more we're starting to see that it's like, no, it doesn't seem like there's a fear. It just seems like you can do it, so you did it. There was a black man on the ground in handcuffs, and you could take his life, so you did, almost knowing that there would be no ramifications. And then again, everyone on the internet has to watch this. Everyone sees it. It floods our timelines as people. And I think one ray of sunshine for me in that moment was seeing how many people instantly condemned what they saw. You know, and maybe it's because I'm an optimistic person, but I don't think I've ever seen anything like that, especially not in America. I haven't seen a police video come out and just see across the board. I mean, even Fox News commentators and police chiefs from around the country immediately condemning what they saw. No questions, not what was he doing, not just going, no, what happened here was wrong. It was wrong. This person got murdered on camera. And then the police were fired. Great. But I think what people take for granted is how much for so many people that feels like nothing, you know? How many of us as human beings can take the life of another human being and then have firing be the worst thing that happens to us? And yes, we don't know where the case will go, don't get me wrong, but it feels like there is no moment of justice. There is no, you know, if you're watching a movie, you'd at least want the cops, you'd want to see the perpetrators in handcuffs. You'd want to see the perpetrators facing some sort of justice. Yes, they might come out on bail, etc., but I think there's a lot of catharsis that comes with seeing that justice being doled out. When the riots happened, that for me was an interesting culmination of everything. I saw so many people online saying, these riots are disgusting. This is not how a society should be run. You do not loot and you do not burn and this is not how our society is built. And that actually triggered something in me where I was like, man, okay, society. But what is society? And fundamentally, when you boil it down, society is a contract. It's a contract that we sign as human beings amongst each other. We sign a contract with each other as people, whether it's spoken or unspoken, and we say, amongst this group of us, we agree in common rules, common ideals, and common practices that are going to define us as a group. That's what I think a society is. It's a contract. And as with most contracts, the contract is only as strong as the people who are abiding by it. But if you think of being a black person in America who is living in Minneapolis or Minnesota or any place where you're not having a good time, ask yourself this question when you watch those people. What vested interest do they have in maintaining the contract? Why don't we all loot? Why doesn't everybody take? Because we've agreed on things. There are so many people who are starving out there. There's so many people who don't have. There are people who are destitute. There are people who, when the virus hit and they don't have a second paycheck, already broke, which is insane, but that's the reality. But still, think about how many people who don't have, the have-nots, say, you know what, I'm still going to play by the rules even though I have nothing, because I still wish for this society to work and exist. And then some members of that society, namely black American people, watch time and time again how the contract that they have signed with society is not being honored by the society that has forced them to sign it with them. When you watch Ahmaud Arbery being shot and you hear that those men have been released, and were it not for the video and the outrage, those people would be living their lives. What part of the contract is that in society? When you see George Floyd on the ground and you see a man losing his life in a way that no person should ever have to lose their life, at the hands of someone who's supposed to enforce the law, what part of the contract is that? And a lot of people say, well, what good does this do? Yeah, but what good doesn't it do? That's the question people don't ask the other way around. What good does it do to loot Target? How does it help you to loot Target? Yeah, but how does it help you to not loot Target? Answer that question. Because the only reason you didn't loot Target before was because you were upholding society's contract. There is no contract if law and people in power don't uphold their end of it. And that's the thing I think people don't understand sometimes, is that we need people at the top to be the most accountable, because they are the ones who are basically setting the tone and the tenor for everything that we do in society. It's the same way we tell parents to set an example for their kids, the same way we tell captains or coaches to set an example for their players, the same way you tell teachers to set an example for their students. The reason we do that is because we understand in society that if you lead by example, there is a good chance that people will follow that example that you have set. And so if the example law enforcement is setting is that they do not adhere to the laws, then why should the citizens of that society adhere to the laws when in fact the law enforcers themselves don't? There's a really fantastic chapter in Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, where he talks about the principles. What is it? He talks about the principles of legitimacy. And he says, in order for us to argue that any society or any legal body or any power is legitimate, we have to agree on core principles. And those 3 principles, if I remember correctly, is number 1, we have to agree on what the principles are. Number 2, we have to believe that the people who are enforcing the principles are going to enforce them fairly. And number 3, we have to agree that everyone in that society is going to be treated fairly according to those principles. It is safe to say in this 1 week alone, and maybe even from the beginning of coronavirus really blowing out in America, Black Americans have seen their principles completely delegitimized. Because if you're a Black person in America right now and you're watching this, if you're a Black American person specifically and you're watching this, What principles are you seeing? I think sometimes the thing we need to remember, and it's something I haven't remembered my whole life. You start to learn these things. You know, when you travel the world, when you read, when you learn about society, I think is that like when you are a have and when you are a have-not, you see the world in very different ways. And a lot of the time people say to the have-nots, this is not the right way to handle things. When Colin Kaepernick kneels, they say this is not the right way to protest. When Martin Luther King had children as part of his protests in Birmingham, Alabama, people said having children as your protest is not the right way to do things. When he marched in Selma, people said this is not the right way to do things. When people marched through the streets in South Africa during apartheid, they said this is not the right way to do things. When people burn things, they say it's never the right way, because there is never a right way to protest. And I've said this before, there is no right way to protest, because that's what protest is. It cannot be right because you are protesting against a thing that is stopping you. And so I think what a lot of people don't realize is the same way you might have experienced even more anger and more just visceral disdain watching those people loot that target. Think to yourselves, or maybe it would help you if you think about that unease that you felt watching that target being looted. Try to imagine how it must feel for Black Americans when they watch themselves being looted every single day. Because that's fundamentally what's happening in America. Police in America are looting Black bodies. And I know someone might think that's an extreme phrase, but it's not, because here's the thing I think a lot of people don't realize. George Floyd died. That is part of the reason the story became so big, is because he died. But how many George Floyds are there that don't die? How many men are having knees put on their necks? How many Sandra Blands are out there being tossed around? We don't, it doesn't make the news because it's not grim enough. It doesn't even get us enough anymore. It's only the deaths, the gruesome deaths that stick out. But imagine to yourself, if you grew up in a community where every day someone had their knee on your neck, where every day somebody was out there oppressing you every single day. You tell me what that does to you as a society, as a community, as a group of people. And when you know that this is happening because of the color of your skin, not because the people are saying it's happening because of the color of your skin, but rather because it's only happening to you and you're the only people who have that skin color. And I know there's people who say, yeah, but like, well, how come black people don't care when black people kill? But man, that's one of the dumbest arguments ever. Of course they care. If you've ever been to a hood anywhere, not just in America, but anywhere in the world, you'd know how much black people care about that. If you know anything about under-policing and over-policing, though, you would understand how that comes to be. The police show black people how valuable their lives are considered by the society. And so then those people who live in those communities know how to or not deal with those lives. Because best believe, if you kill a white person, especially in America, there is a whole lot more justice than is coming your way than if you killed some black body in a black neighborhood somewhere. And so to anyone who watched that video, don't ask yourself if it's right or wrong to loot, or don't ask yourself, wow, what does looting help? No. Ask yourself that question. Ask yourself why it got you that much more watching these people loot, because they were destroying the contract that you thought they had signed with your society. And now think to yourself, imagine if you were them watching that contract being ripped up every single day. Ask yourself how you'd feel.
Okay, I know some of you may be sitting here wondering, like, why is Olivia making all this content about, critical race theory and eugenics? It's 2022. She has all this opportunity. Like, why doesn't she just just go live her life or whatever? Like, stop talking about history. We're in the future and we're all, post-racial now. Here's the reason why. One, generational wealth and opportunity. 2, the racial wealth gap, and 3, representation. So, to be frank, I spent my entire high school experience, so that's just like freshman through senior year in high school, kind of understanding and unpacking not only my place in my family, so having really hard conversations with my mom, with my other family members, to sort of understand why certain decisions were made or were not made, and having conversations with other classmates and friends and boyfriends and stuff to try to understand like how they were making life decisions. And then I've also had a lot of collegiate experiences in either community college or on different college campuses or with professors, and I've done international travel and worked in corporate spaces. So in terms of like me coming to my sort of like understanding of the world and my place in it, that is how I'm able to say some shit right now and be like real confident. I'm like, I know what I'm talking about. And when I think about like how to move forward, unfortunately, I realize I've left a lot of people behind because they lack all the context that I understand. And then when I see certain representation coming out, you know, like I see songs from like Sweetie or Her, and I'm like happy that these women have microphones, or who's another good one, Shensa. I am happy that these women have microphones, but I understand their lack of depth. Like I feel like maybe Her actually might have done a decent job of this, but then I feel like to me she's still kind of fat and boring, and so I personally can't relate. Like if Yara Shahidi put out an album, I would go like, oh my god, this is incredible. I feel like I would relate. I feel like Willow Smith is a bit too young, but when she gets a little bit older, I feel like I might relate to some of her stuff. But I think Taylor Swift, Hayley Williams, actually Hobbin. Surprisingly, I really like Hobbin's new stuff. I think it's really good. I'm really happy that she put it out. I think she had taken it off Spotify because I couldn't find it when I looked for it, but I definitely like it. Yeah, like I think that because I have been able to be so introspective about, you know, so many things in my life, it's been clear, like, you know, how I got to where I am and like why I understand certain things that other people don't. So this is why I've had to be kind of more openly confident about my level of attractiveness, because like I said, I am black, right? Like I understand where I lay in terms of like also, okay, my form of blackness or an attractiveness is also not new. Okay, like there are women who are hot like me. Like we all are very familiar with Tyra Banks being extra gorgeous. Okay, we've seen Rihanna and Beyonce be very attractive. And I've said this before, you can have your feelings about my level of attractiveness. I fall into that sort of lane, okay? I'm like the Halle Yonsei. The Aaliyah Halle Yonsei. I don't know. Like it's in that category. I'm definitely Olivia, right? Where like I have a very Olivia thing going on. It's still different from other people, but it's similar enough to where like American pop culture is like international pop culture. Y'all have seen attractive black girls like me. Y'all have also seen very unattractive black people. So we all kind of like know the difference and people aren't confused. But I feel like some of y'all fresh off the boats are getting here thinking that everybody forgot or something. Or we were all confused about like who's attractive and who's not. Because I think y'all came and were like, no, okay, like the Desi Indians or something are now more attractive than black people. Like you can even, like in no world is Mindy Kaling even half as attractive as me. you can be delusional all you want and have love for fat Indian girls, but in the hierarchy of Indian women, Mindy Kaling is still ugly and fat. She can be likable, she can be funny, she can have money. Unfortunately, women are still valued in terms of beauty standards. So, you can hate me, but Mindy Kaling, still fat and ugly. She can be a representative for all the other ugly fat chicks. I see them all the time in the research groups at Facebook. They are mothers, they are researchers, they own homes. So there's a lot of other attributes that are qualifiers of them, but like that still is not my story. So I just want to be clear there. So okay. And then I also had to talk about like class, because while there are a lot of black people, black children who have grown up in poverty, that just ain't my story. I've told you guys stories about my godfather. I've told you guys stories about my mom. Okay. I've told you stories about just the way that I've grown up, the infrastructure in really like upper middle class school districts, neighborhoods. My family selling property and just my mom cashing out. Like, that's just my honest story. Okay. And I've also told you guys stories about I've written about my work experience all over the internet. So I'm not saying I retired wealthy and now I'm like sitting in my cabin smoking cigars all day. Like, that's not the case. But also, like, you know, I've worked hard enough I have done the work. This is not something that's given to me, right? Like, I have been working. I'm still working, right? Like, to support myself, just like every other adult should be doing. Like, supporting yourself as an adult is real. You do have to grow up one day and realize, like, you can't eat off of someone else's plate. So, okay, like, it's great that your family loves you, or they don't, or they did stuff, or they didn't. That shit does get old, and you do just, you know, grow the fuck up and pay your bills like the rest of us. So that is real. I feel like it is appropriate. It's an appropriate time to say that now, and so I do want to say it and just make it clear so we all kind of get it in some way, you know. Okay. And then I also have to talk about, like, maybe it's like cross-cultural communication. I've already talked about this, but like some people call it code switching, but I think other people, or for a lot of people, it's just kind of understanding contextually how certain groups, places, cultures operate. Like, do you understand how to talk to academics about the current state of what's going on? Do you know how to talk to foodies, or, you know, do you know how to talk to high schoolers, or like, you know, like everyone in all those groups, they're just the topics of conversation are different. This is why it's super useful to have like YouTubers who are just online explaining stuff, just so you kind of get a sense of like, oh, okay, here's what everyone is saying. Well, not everyone, but here's what some people are saying, and here's how they are feeling generally right now, and, you know, just so you can listen to it, and then you can sort of have something to pull from, as opposed to just being completely naive to what someone from a different culture or ethnic group is talking about. This is why representation is important, and unfortunately, all we have right now is just YouTube. I feel like the Hulu and Netflix shows are trying. They're like getting there, but they're just moving so slowly. And, you know, YouTubers are just doing it every day. You know, it's TikTok, it's YouTube. Things are moving quick. Okay. So, okay, then we can talk a bit about mental health a little bit. Because, and I was going to make another video about that, but I'll insert a snippet of it here. So, the movie Master is such an important topic for me right now, because it is the first time I've seen certain aspects of my story on screen, and I can pull a direct reference in terms of like imagery, context, other characters, into that story and then start to unpack a situation that I've been in that is similar to that in some way. I have never seen that story on screen, and it is very hard to start to tell your own story because there's always some context of other characters that are hard to convey on camera with one person. So like if I had a whole bunch of other actors or friends who could come in and like play the part, and then I wrote like little scripts for them and they could like reenact those situations, it would make more sense to you as the viewer, but I don't really have that, and it has been very hard to talk about it because it's taken me a lot of therapy to start to talk about first of all, my lived experience and put that into words, and then talking to my mom, for instance, and then understanding her lived experience and putting that into words, and then inserting my brother, and then inserting Ariel, and then inserting Alvid, and then inserting Camille, and then inserting Amina, and then inserting these people on my team, and then inserting this like part of the country I've never been in, and then inserting my landlord, and it's like all of these different people and all of these different perspectives, and it's just taken me a while to